All right. So we've got Jamie on the Resilient Teacher podcast. Welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to have you on the show, Jamie.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. And I always ask guests on the podcast to tell me a little bit about their experience in education. Like, what was the journey that really led you to writing your book?
Absolutely. So, teaching was actually a second career for me because when I went to college and when I got out of college, I had this whole idea. I was like, I don't like kids. It's kind of embarrassing to admit now.
Same though.
To a group of teachers, though, when you say things like, I don't like kids, they're like, oh, I just didn't. I didn't have a lot of experience with kids, and I was kind of scared of them, to be 100% honest. I was kind of scared of them.
Yeah.
But I had this job as an office job. I worked as a lobbyist at the Arizona State Supreme Court, and I thought it was what I always wanted to do. And then I had kids. And oh my gosh, it completely changed my heart. Every day when I went to work, I was working with adults, and I thought, they are not nearly as much fun as kids.
Right.
I just want to be around kids, which was crazy. It was hard for me to even admit that I wanted to be a teacher. It took me a while to actually come out and say it. But I went back to school to become a teacher. I substituted for quite some time. And then I found myself in a third grade classroom. And I seriously loved the kids. I was so excited to be in the classroom, but immediately found out it's not exactly like I thought it would be, like from watching TV and so forth. I didn't have the resources I needed. I had very little curriculum. And what little curriculum we had was really quite outdated. So I had almost nothing. I didn't even have pencils.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean you don't have pencils? Copy paper. I had no idea that teachers would have to provide their own copy paper. I was just blown away. I was unprepared for what a real classroom is like. But I was so determined. I'm going to be a great teacher. Like I'm going to show them that I can be a great teacher. I don't know who the them was, but I was still like really, really passionate that I was going to be this fantastic teacher. And so I put in so many hours. I worked every night. I got up. I was always the first to school in the morning. I'm more of a morning person. Always the first to school in the morning. I worked every weekend. I dragged my kids to school on the weekends. Summer breaks, I didn't take a break. I remember it being the last day of school and leaving to go home. I was sitting out at our community pool planning out next year's classroom. The day we got out for summer break. I mean, I took work with me on vacations and everything. And so towards the end of that first year, I really had sort of a moment where I realized this wasn't sustainable and that if I continued to teach like this, I wasn't going to be a good teacher or a good mother. And I either needed to quit, which sounded terrible. I'd worked too hard to get here.
Right.
Or I needed to make some changes. And I realized I'm just going to make the changes. And I started thinking like, I'm really good at making things easier. I've got to lean in to what I'm good at. And so I started to create systems in my classroom. I started to create systems at home, even how I started to simplify things. I decided to stop feeling I needed to copy everything I saw online because it's so tempting. There's amazing ideas all over Instagram and now TikTok. TikTok wasn't there then. I'm way too old for that. But I mean, there were so many great ideas. Pinterest. And I always felt like I had to do all the things. And I had to learn to give up that thought that I needed to do all the things. But as I made these changes, I started to fall in love with teaching. I was in such a great place. I felt like I finally hit my stride. However, my physical health was struggling. I do have epilepsy. And so I do have seizures, and I was starting to have them sometimes at school. And I felt like, one, I wasn't feeling good, but two, I felt like it was causing so much anxiety for my students to have to be a part of that. And I realized that I was going to have to leave teaching, which was incredibly hard for me to do. But I got through that by telling myself, you know what? You're not done with education. You're going to take your time at home and you're going to dedicate it to making teaching easier for other teachers who are still in the classroom. And that's what I have been doing ever since I left the classroom, is asking myself, what resources do they need? What professional development would help them? And a few years ago, I thought, I've got to write a book. It's the easiest way to help them to share all these strategies that worked for me. And so I decided to write How to Love Teaching again, in hopes that even if there's just 2 or 3 strategies from the book that they grab onto, that it will save them time and keep them from burning out.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love your story. And, the majority of the people that are listening to this podcast are currently or are in the process of recovering from burnout. So,
Mhm.
hearing your story about how you were doing all the things, that's something that a lot of teachers deal with. They think that in order to be a good teacher that you have to do those things, and you just kind of like blew me out of the water with your story. I love to listen to people's stories about burnout and that sort of thing, and so thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think what you're doing with your book is amazing. I got to read some of your book and it's fantastic. It is such a breath of fresh air, and I think what you did with your time out of the classroom is so needed.
Thank you so much. You just brought up that whole, like, we have to do all the things to be a good teacher. Oh,
Yeah.
that term good teacher, that was actually what was holding me up so much that first year. And what I found from my audience now is that it's holding them up too. What the
Mhm.
heck is a good teacher?
Yeah, like and it's such a crazy concept because a lot of times I think that the burnout that we experience is more put on us by ourselves, like by our perfectionistic tendencies. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
by our high achieving tendencies. I
Mhm.
was there. I tried to do all of the things
Yeah.
because I'm a high achiever.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of those things come from a place of not feeling like enough or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things that teachers face today is that job creep. Have you heard of that term before?
No, I've never heard of that term.
Okay, so we talked about it in our sustainability series on the podcast, but it's basically like a little bit of work and then you get a little bit more of work and then it becomes this snowball effect, right?
Mhm.
And they continually get more and more added to their plate and their to-do list. I know you have a chapter in your book about tackling the to-do list. What are some
Yeah.
of the ways that you discuss dealing with this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talked about that domino effect, I told a story in my book about marshmallows. At my wedding shower, my mom threw it for me, and she had this game where she asked my then fiance, Scott, questions, and then she would pose the same question to me. And if I got the answer correct, then we moved on to the next question. But if I didn't, we put a giant marshmallow in my mouth. And I don't know who duped me. One of them duped me. Either he purposely gave all the wrong answers or she purposely changed them all. They will not tell me to this day, but I got like every question wrong, one after the other. And so my mouth was full of marshmallows, marshmallow after marshmallow, until I couldn't breathe. And to this day, I like, ew, marshmallow. Like, I can't even
Yeah.
handle it. Like, oh my gosh. But that's what teaching is, right? It's like you get out of school and you're really excited and new, and you get like one marshmallow in your mouth, and then you actually get the job, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. More marshmallows. They give you curriculum, or they tell you, heck, we have none. Figure it out yourself.
Figure it out
More
yourself.
marshmallows. You get your classroom, and they're like, you got to figure out report cards. And even if you're not a brand new teacher, now it's like you got a student teacher. Oh, look, new curriculum. Oh,
Mhm.
and that new curriculum didn't work, so new curriculum. And your technology, we give you no technology, or we're going to give you new technology and not tell you how to use it. And you just keep adding and adding, and then you can't breathe. And yes, in some ways this is self-inflicted, because we teachers are such perfectionists, and they
Mhm.
love their kids so much that they think, I got to do more. I always got to do more. I talked to a principal about this, and he said, my teachers, I'm not asking them to do some of these things that they're doing, but it is still a broken system. And I don't
Yes,
want
absolutely.
anyone in your audience to think I don't understand that. It is definitely a broken educational system, and there's so many things you have no control over: your class size, all the testing, your pay rate.
Yeah,
These are
that
things
part.
that we have got to fix, and I am working so hard with my voice, my vote, and my platform. But in the meantime, let's tackle some of the self-inflicted stress. Let's try and take a few things off your plate, or help you to get through things a little bit faster, so that you're not leaving the classroom when you truly had a heart for teaching. I hate to see a teacher who doesn't want to leave the classroom end up feeling like she has no choice.
Right.
That's what I really want with my book. So when you talk about the to-do list, most of the things on our to-do list is our head telling us we have to do it, when in reality, they're not priority items that are going to make us better teachers. First of all, you've got to define what the heck does it mean to be a good teacher? And I'm going to help you do that in the book. But really, teachers need to choose something they have control over instead of like what the school has said. Oh, good teachers are the ones that get the highest testing scores. Do you really believe that?
No.
I mean, do you really believe the highest testing scores equal best teaching? Because most teachers will tell you no. Well, then let's take that out of the definition. Write your own definition. I mean, I've heard teachers writing definitions like, to be a good teacher for me means that I help my students to find a love for learning. Okay, now we're talking, because guess what? No test helps for a love of learning. And you don't have to get an A to love learning. But every day when you go home, like while you're driving home, you can say, what did I do today to help even one of my students find a love for learning? You're like, well, I helped someone pick out a book and now they're really excited about it. Awesome. You're helping to create a love for reading. And that it's like putting a check mark, like I'm successful. And then when you look at your to-do list a lot differently once you have a definition of success, because now you realize that if it's for you, it's all about finding the love of learning. You're looking at your to-do list and you're like, most of these things aren't about that, like bulletin boards. I can cross that off my list. But I think the most important strategy for getting more done is to plan our plan time. And whatever that plan time means for you. Some teachers get all riled up when I say plan time. They're like, I don't have plan time. And I'm sorry for that, because that's unfortunate and you should. Again, broken system. But your plan time might be before school, after school, whenever you choose to do your grading, lesson planning, responding to email, those sorts of things. We plan for our students. Teachers do that. They plan out every minute of their instructional time. But they very rarely plan for themselves on that plan time. So you go to sit down and you have this massive to-do list, and your brain will do a couple things. It might look at the to-do list and go, too much, can't do it. And so you do nothing. You're like, I'm just going to go next store and vent to my teacher friend, because there's no way I'm going to be able to tackle this to-do list anyway. Or you may decide like, okay, I'm gonna work on the to-do list. But what you do is you like go through the to-do list and pick out a couple of the easiest things, not necessarily high priority, just easiest. But when you leave that day, your head is still telling you, you didn't finish. You didn't do enough, because your list was far too long for you to possibly finish. And so when I talk about planning your plan time, I'm giving you some strategies for how to put the most important things from your to-do list on your calendar during a specific time slot. Instead of just listing the things you need to do, I want you to pick the most important thing from that list and go to your calendar and put it in a time slot when you will be able to finish that task, not work on it. Work on it's confusing to our brain. When can you finish it? And if it's too big of a task to fit into one time slot, break it into mini tasks so that you can finish it. So maybe grading. Maybe you have 30 reading tests to grade, and that's a lot, and your time slots are short. So if you only have 30 minutes to work on it, don't write work on grading reading assessment, because you're not going to get 30 reading assessments graded in 30 minutes. And if you can, then you probably need to write this whole book about, we need to know your strategies.
Yes.
But instead, maybe you're writing something like grade 10 reading tests. So you're not going to get every test grade, and you know that. You're going to have to add it into other blocks, but now you're planning for that. Instead of just using that 30 minutes and then immediately your brain going, you didn't do it, you didn't get it done. You're actually planning. I'm going to do 10 here. I'm going to do 10 tomorrow morning and 10 tomorrow afternoon. So now when you finish 10, your brain gets to celebrate. You did it. You only planned to do 10 and you got 10 done. And now, even though the whole task isn't complete, you can be excited that you got what you planned to do. So it's really important that we take the calendar, we look at time slots, and we start putting our most important tasks into those time slots for when you will finish. So now it's not a to-do list. This is like a to-done list.
Oh, I love that. I love that to-done list. I love how you talked about, you have to realize what your definition of a good teacher is, because on the podcast, we talk about our values. Like, what are your values? If you don't know what those are, if you're not self-aware, then you're not going to come up with the idea of what that good teacher is and what that looks like for you and to be able to prioritize the tasks, because they'll keep giving us things. They'll just keep giving them, just keep giving them. And if we don't really know what is authentically what we enjoy, what are the things that we need to get done in order to be the best teacher that we can be, that what does that look like for us? So I love those strategies. I think that they are just chef's kiss. Yes.
Yeah, our
Uh,
brain will tell us that all those tasks are important and that we have
right.
to do them all. So you have to challenge your brain a little bit. Like, hey, do I need to change the bulletin board? Hey, do I need to download these apps onto the class iPads today? Because your brain will instantly be like, yep, you
Yep.
have to do it all or you're not good enough. So
Right.
you have to decide what it means to be good, because unfortunately, society isn't going to do it for you. Your administration isn't going to do it for you. And you're right. The more you say yes, the more they'll ask for more. And so you
Yeah.
have to be really careful about that.
Yeah. You also mentioned like when you sit down to look at this list of to-dos, some people will just be like, can't I'll just go talk to that friend over there. And we've talked about that too, and how that is like a stress response. We have it's the flight response
Mhm.
in fight, flight, freeze, and fawn.
Yep.
And so I mean, you're just bringing it all together in this wonderful book. So I know that your book, How to Love Teaching Again, is going to really support so many educators. Can you share a little bit more about your book, what's in it, where teachers can get it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I wrote this book, I didn't want it to just be a pep talk because I don't know, but teachers need a whole lot more than a pep talk. I wanted to give them something they could legitimately do tomorrow in the classroom to make teaching a little bit easier. Because if we just make it a little bit easier each day, then we can find that love. It's hard to be in love with a career that is taking over your entire life. It's
Yes.
hard if you don't have time to take care of yourself, if you don't have enough time for your family. It's just it's not sustainable. You got to come up for air sometimes. And so I wanted this book to be full of really actionable strategies. So there's strategies for batching your lesson plans, there's strategies for saving time with grading, and strategies for eliminating the chaos in your classroom, setting routines. And I hope that you can go through the book and even just find a couple. I don't want the book to be a whole bunch more marshmallows for
Yeah.
you. That's not my intention. And so, right in chapter 1, we define success, and then I give you permission to work on these strategies that are going to get you to your own personal definition quickest, which means you might skip to chapter 5 or 6, whichever one you need the most. I hope that it will be more like a workbook that you can go through at your own personal pace. So, How to Love Teaching Again, you can find the book on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, target.com, walmart.com, wherever you order books from, you'll be able to find it there. And again, I just wanted it to be actionable. I didn't want it to be one more thing someone was telling you to do, but rather actionable. So I threw in everything that I could think of that had helped me. And there were times where I was like, maybe I'm getting carried away, but I'm like, no, if this helps a teacher, I want to share it with them.
Yes. Yes, I love that. And I know so many teachers who are like, there's no hope in falling in love with teaching again. It's never going to get better. They've lost their passion for the classroom and their career. What's the number one thing that you would say to those teachers?
First and foremost, if you truly don't want to teach anymore, that is really a personal decision, and I know it's a hard one, and I would never try to convince a teacher who doesn't want to teach to stay in the classroom.
Right.
But if in your heart of hearts you're like, this is what I've always wanted to do, I just can't do it the way it is right now, then I feel like, okay, we can do this. And there's so many great strategies in here. I do think planning your time and batching your lesson plans are huge. But one thing that made teaching so much more enjoyable for me, and I hope this strategy will help some of your teachers who feel like there's no hope. I felt like I needed to fall in love with my least favorite subject. We all have the one subject that we feel so good at, or even, if you have secondary teachers, even that one skill or unit, you can use the same strategy. You feel passionate about the subject or this topic, and you love to teach it and you're good at it. but there's always this other thing that you have to teach that you just dread. You don't like teaching it. And for me, I felt like I can't be in love with teaching if there's always something I have to teach that I hate to teach.
Right.
Like, I have to do it every day. I need to love what I'm teaching. And so for me, it was math that I felt really good at. I wasn't good at math in school, so it's kind of crazy that I was feeling good about math as a teacher. I think that I just taught it differently than I learned and felt
Yeah.
really passionate about that. And math was going really well. I was so passionate about it. I loved math, and other teachers coming in my classroom to see how I was teaching math, and I was getting really excited about it. But then it was time to teach writing. And I thought I was going to be a good writing teacher because I always wanted to be a writer. But
Yeah.
then when the kids came to me and they hated writing, I realized like, oh, I didn't expect this. And it's much harder to teach it. Just because I like to do it doesn't mean that I know all the skills to teach writing. I dreaded it. And I would
Yeah.
put it off and I'd put it off until I'd be like, oh no, we don't have any more time. Sorry guys, can't do it. And then I got real with myself and I'm like, okay, I've got to figure it out. So I made a list. I sat down. I love brainstorming time, by the way, just like 30-minute pops here and there when something's not
Yes.
going well, where you could just like, how could I make this better? Because if you pose your brain questions, it will give you answers. So
Mhm.
even if you just go for a walk or usually your best ideas come when you're like taking a shower or you're just not stressed.
Mhm.
So for me, I'll just schedule a half hour to sit with myself and a notebook. And I said, what can I do? Well, what am I doing really well right now in the subject I enjoy teaching? I made a huge list. What's going well? And I wasn't humble, and I don't think you should be either. You don't have to show your list to anybody. This is just for you. But I wrote things down like I was using small group, I was giving choice, I was teaching in units of study. Then I looked at writing and I'm like, could I do any of these things in writing? And not the whole list. I couldn't. They're very different. But there were so many things I brought over to writing, including small groups and choice. And it immediately made me a happier teacher because I started to have fun with writing too. So now I'm having fun in math, I'm having fun in writing. And that made my teaching time so much more enjoyable for
Yes.
me, which gave me like this pump of endorphins that helped me to get through some of my to-do tasks after school that weren't as fun, like grading, because
Yeah.
I really truly was loving my time with the students.
Oh, I love that strategy. I mean, I've never thought of that, but I'm still in the classroom, and so I'm thinking about an area that I really don't like, and I'm like, that one's really good. I need to try that. So I'm definitely going to use that. Oh my goodness, Jamie, like your book, your strategies, they're amazing. They're amazing. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show. Can you share with the listeners a little bit about where they can find you on social media, what other things you offer, how you can help them love teaching again?
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing in the classroom and what you're doing with your platform, by the way. It is
Yes.
so needed. You can find me at notsowimpyteacher.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram as Not So Wimpy Teacher. And we publish articles all the time about making teaching easier, and we create resources with the goal always to be how can we cut back the amount of prep time a teacher has to spend while still getting to watch their students thrive, because we're not trying to train you to be a lazy teacher. We're trying to train you to be the good teacher you've always wanted to be in less time per day.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to link all of the things in the show notes. I will definitely link the book, everything, so that all of the listeners can go and check that out. They will love it and it will help so many people. Thank you again, Jamie, for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Yes. Okay, great.